Hello, and welcome to the Blessings in the Streets podcast. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts, and you are in store for an exciting show today. In studio with me, I have three wonderful individuals that I've had the pleasure of knowing for some time now. All three are authors, and they understand that there is glory in their story, and they have come today to share a little bit of their journey in life with you in hopes of empowering and encouraging and uplifting you, particularly during times of adversity and challenging moments. So, without any further ado, please help me welcome in my guests, Ms. Denise Castile, Ms. Michelle Nelson, and Mr. Jeff Savage. Thank you so much, everybody, for being on the show today. How are you doing? Everybody,
Fantastic.
all right,
Very
all right.
well.
Everybody good. That's good to hear. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the show, I want to give you all an opportunity to just sort of tell a little bit about yourselves to our audience. So I'll start out with you, Denise. Just share with us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you.
Hmm.
I am again Denise Castile, and I live in McKinney, Texas. I am born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am the owner and CEO of Any Day CPR Training. We help businesses and organizations stay safe and compliant. We're mobile. We come to you. I am also the founder and executive director of Fresh Start for Your Heart, a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. I'm an author of I Don't Want to Die Like This, A Survivor's Guide to Thriving After a Heart Attack. And that's me.
Awesome, awesome. And of course, you and I have a Indianapolis connection because I spent a good portion of my adulthood in Indianapolis before relocating here to Dallas. So
Absolutely.
that's awesome. And and even interesting that you lived in McKinney because that was the first place I lived when I came to Dallas. So that
Lots of
a lot
connections.
of connections there. All right, all right. Michelle, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Nelson, and I live in Garland, Texas. Am I hearing an echo, or is that my imagination?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Am I hearing an echo?
A little bit. You might, if you have the echo cancellation feature, you should see a button for that. You might be able to make a modification to that. It should be in your settings area. That might help you a little bit. No worries. We certainly don't want to miss any of your story. In fact, while you work on that, I'm gonna jump to
Okay,
Jeff, and then I'm gonna
go
bounce
ahead.
back to you. So, Jeff, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Jeff Savage. I am a actor, a voice actor, and an athlete. I run marathons all over the world, and I wrote a book about how, in the course of running marathons, I identified that the same things that make you successful in running a marathon are the same things that make you successful in life. And a marathon can be compared to the pursuit of any long range goal that you may have. And so I just finished my 30th marathon just last week in Duluth, Minnesota. And it was just a great time to spend with friends and family. But to learn more about that and about me, you can find out more at jeffsavageonline.com. It's kind of the main hub that kind of documents everything that I'm up to.
Awesome, awesome. 30 marathons. Just when you said 30 marathons, I was already starting to sweat and lose my breath
That's
just because
funny.
you said 30 marathons. I'm already a
Yeah.
little tired. I think I'm gonna need to pat my brow a little bit or something because that takes a lot. I can only imagine what is required, but definitely a great accomplishment. We can see the array of of medals hanging in your background. So that is an awesome thing. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm gonna jump back
That's
to
fantastic.
Michelle. You good to go on your end? Everything is it clicking in for you?
I guess we'll see.
Okay, well just roll with it. We're gonna let it do what it do. Tell us about
Okay.
yourself.
My name is Michelle Nelson, and I live in Garland, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. I grew up here, but I was originally born in Baltimore, Maryland, and we moved here when I was 7 for my father's work. I work as a social media content specialist and a copywriter, so I do a lot of marketing during my day job. And I also work as a writer, and I'm a certified life coach.
Awesome, awesome. See, And I've known Michelle for a little while now, and I didn't even know some of this stuff about social media content, marketing. So look like we need to be having a little bit more conversations. And hi, good morning. I see you at church and everything. So see, I didn't even know. So this is what makes moments like this special. So thank you again for introducing yourselves to our audience, and of course, give me even some more insight about you for myself as well. So with that said, let's jump right into it. What I'd like to do with you, of the three of you, is just to kind of hear about where your journey began. As with any story, as with any journey of life, there's always, of course, a beginning, and so that's where I want to start with you. And in doing so, I just want you to kind of reflect back on your childhood, and if you would share with us what was it like for you growing up? What was the scene like? What was the environment like in your respective cities that you grew up in? Because everybody that's listening may not be from where you're from or never even visited, and just to give us some insight. And if there's any fond memories or even challenges that you faced growing up, I would be interested in you sharing that with the audience. So I'm going to start with you, Denise. Please share that with us. What was it like growing up in Indianapolis? For those who are not familiar with Indianapolis.
Growing up in Indianapolis for me was a good experience. I come from a two-parent household. My parents, Shirley and Jerry, they I was the only child for about almost a decade.
Wow.
So was I spoiled? It's very, very possible. Yeah, it's very, very possible that I was a tad bit spoiled. And I loved being the only child, and then my brother came. I do absolutely love my brother, but yes, it was difficult. That was a challenge for me because I was accustomed to being the only one. Fond memories for me are spending summers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana with my two cousins. We would go and spend that time with my grandparents, and our grandparents doted over us, and everything was awesome. So we had a great I enjoyed our summers there. uh, Challenges started to come when I turned 16. When I turned 16, my parents separated and ultimately divorced, and it was challenging. I never saw my or heard my parents argue. So for them to separate and get a divorce, it was shocking because I didn't recognize it. I didn't see the signs, which when I think about it, I'm grateful because they didn't scream, they didn't fight with each other, that type of thing, or at least not so that at that point my brother and I could hear. And so that was challenging, and but we persevered, and I'm here today.
Awesome, awesome. And I think that's beautiful when you say. I mean, obviously, we you never want to hear about separations and divorces, but I think it's awesome that your parents did what they did to shield you as yourself and your brother from that, because you don't see a lot of that these days, particularly when the parents are going through what they go through. We know that that's a part of marriage, but nevertheless, to protect your children and to not allow them to see you in that negative light, I think is very important, and it kind of helps what would otherwise be a difficult time to sort of
Absolutely.
allow you to be able to transition with that. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate
Of
that.
course. Of course.
Jeff, I'll jump to you. What was it like for Jeff growing up? Any challenges,
Well,
fond memories, any of that sort?
yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles, California, which, a lot of times people think it's all about sunshine and the beach and all that. But as a kid growing up, I was really, I may have been spoiled myself because often I would get to go to Disneyland a lot as a kid. That was kind of where my parents would take me for birthdays and celebrations and things like that. But one of the fun things I remember from growing up was that I was old enough to know about it, but I remember in school we celebrated it. The 1984 Olympics were in Los Angeles, and just to kind of be a part of that whole environment is one of the things I remember from growing up as a kid. But unfortunately, one of the other things I remember growing up as a kid is something that I share with Denise here is that I am a product of a divorced family as well. When I was 7, my parents, split up, and my dad was a very easygoing guy and didn't really impose a lot of rules and regulations. But then my mom met my stepdad, who was the complete opposite, very strict, very from a military background, and really introduced a completely different parenting dynamic into our family structure, which, as you might imagine, sent me into all sorts of confusing directions about who I am, my self esteem, and just that loving family dynamic that all of a sudden was shattered. So, I build my life. Like, that's kind of an early impact of my life that really set me up to who I am today, for sure.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And again, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Again, that's always kind of challenging to have to deal with something of that nature as a kid growing up, and and to be that young, and then have another father-like figure introduced into the situation in the form of your stepdad, and like you said, being from a
Hmm.
totally different, opposite range. I can only imagine what that's like to process something like that. So thank you for sharing that.
For
And,
sure.
and Michelle, uh, please tell us, what was it like for Michelle growing up?
Yes, I grew up in a two-parent household, and I was an only child until I was 9. And then my mom was like, "You're gonna have a sibling," and I was like, "Okay." Um, so that was a very big change in my life. My mom and I were talking a couple of days ago, and she was reminding me of how much I was a daddy's girl growing up, which is interesting because now I'm a caretaker for my father, and I'm sure we'll get more into that later. But um, it was definitely a blessing growing up in a two-parent household. My parents' personalities were very different and still are. Um, their parenting style is very different, and that definitely had and continues to have, I think now, a huge effect on me.
Awesome, awesome. And of course, I've had the pleasure of meeting both of your parents, wonderful individuals. And your dad, of course, my daughter asks about your dad all the time because he just really took to her. And she's like, have you talked to Mr. Henry lately? Have you seen Mr. Henry? So, yeah, that's awesome. Awesome parents that you have. All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, again, thank you for sharing, a little bit about, what was it like for your upbringing. I really do appreciate that. Um, if you would, if you would, in this particular case, as we transition into the next phase of our talk together, I'd like to know from you. I know that each of you are authors. I know that there's elements when you decide to write a book. There's always, I should say, most times there's some elements about your book, even if it's not the entirety of the book, that stems in some way, that transitions in some way, something that you've personally dealt with in life growing up, challenges that you've had, encounters that you have, or whatever. And I don't know if that was the specific case for you or not. I know it was for me. But with that said, I'm interested in knowing from you to share with us a time in your life where, in the midst of all the different challenges and adversities that you experienced, tell us about a time when you got hit with something that was just heavy at a different level. Like I said, it felt like a ton of bricks had just landed on you, and you weren't really sure if you were going to be able to pull through this. But nevertheless, you went through it, you experienced it, and you managed to still overcome the challenges that were with it without allowing it to sort of consume you, if you will. So I'm going to start off. I'll jump back to you, Denise, to tell that story. And just real quick, just for sound purposes, if you're experiencing any echoes, or if I'm not chatting with you at the moment, if you can go ahead and mute your mics in between time, so that way we can minimize any background noises if in case something like that pops up, because I know sometimes that will. But I'll jump to you, Denise. Please share with us what would that journey, what's that story look like for you?
Absolutely. For me, I think growing up, I talked about my parents' divorce. That was tough. We got through it. My parents, prior to the death of my father, my parents became friends, which was awesome for their grandchildren. I don't have any children, but my brother does, so it was great that they had this alliance, allegiance, and were friends. So that was we got through that, and there were other things that came up in my life, but I would imagine to date, the most challenging and most difficult was when I found myself confronted with having a massive heart attack. And I think what makes that, or what made that so tough and challenging, is that my symptoms were ignored. I sought, I did what I was supposed to do. I went and I sought treatment, and I asked, an expert. I asked a cardiologist, hey, what's going on? They did some testing, and I had a massive heart attack because I was underdiagnosed, and it was challenging. And so I would say to date, that's the thing that really has helped define and is defining who I am, and really my purpose. And to add on to that, I I had it, and I had the heart attack, and wondered how could God turn that for my good. I didn't mention that growing up, I grew up in a Christian home, and I always heard the scripture, all things work together for the good for them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And I can remember in the days, in the immediate days that passed after the heart attack, thinking, how, God, how will you turn this for my good? And today, I almost 8 years. We are almost 8 years to the date. July 2nd is 8 years. And I am amazed at how God turned this for my good.
That is awesome.
Back
That is
to you.
awesome. Well, we of course are thankful that you are here to tell that story, because we know the seriousness of having a massive heart attack can do to you. Um, at the time when you had the heart attack, were you by yourself? Was anybody around when it happened, or?
I was traveling for work. There was one other person in the office. Her name is Marie. My flight had been delayed, which I thank God for. When I remember getting the text message, it was on Spirit Airlines, and I got the text message saying that my flight was delayed. And I was like, oh, I cannot believe that the flight is delayed. Oh, I just want to get home because it was coming up to the 4th of July weekend. And I went in, everybody's leaving for work and leaving because it's the holiday. And I remember the supervisor or manager for that office, he says, hey, Marie's back there. I'll see you, next week. And Marie was there. Days later, I asked her, I said, Marie, why were you still there? It was a holiday. Everybody had already gone. And she said, I guess I had to be there for you, Denise. So, no, I thankfully was not by myself.
That is awesome. And of course, I'm sure you know now, even if you didn't know then, that that wasn't an accident
It was
that
not.
Marie happened to be in the building. It wasn't an accident that your flight happened to be delayed,
It was not.
because the timing and the positioning of you going through that moment in a different setting, in a different scenario, could be the difference between life and death right now.
Absolutely.
And so that's just how, as believers, we understand that's just how God works. And he positions you in just the right time with just the right person. And of course, your story, even though I know you don't know this, it has extra special meaning to me, in light of the fact that you said that the friend that happened to be there, that her name was Marie, because my mom's name was Maria. And she died from a heart attack. And today is actually the anniversary of that, 12 years. And so just you telling that story just makes me feel in the spirit of the story that she's joining the podcast to just listen in. So just you saying that, it just kind of hit me. And some people might listen to that and think you're reaching, Joe, you're stretching this. No, no, you said what you said, you speaking to what you're speaking to. It's all tying in together. So thank you for that. That's powerful. And I'm glad, again, thanks to God, that you were able to survive that and being here to share your story. And of course, we're going to hear so much more from you, about that story a little bit more later in the show. So thank you for sharing that. I want to jump to you, Michelle. Um, Again, tell us about a time, this hit different. I've been through a lot. I've been able to get through a lot, but this hit different for me. What was that journey like for you? Tell us a little bit about that and how you've navigated through it.
Yeah, I think that this is really an ongoing journey. Um, kind of preparing for this, I was thinking about, how life just has so many ups and downs, and I can think of a lot of situations that have hit differently. Um, but I remember when I was in college and I was in my senior year and I was having a really hard time. And I didn't realize it at first, but I was struggling with my mental health. I had gone through a time where, you know, a lot of times you're like, I just have the blues. It's just like a hard season. Um, and I remember during this period, I was crying every day. And not just like for 30 seconds, I would be waking up just feeling heavy, waking up, going to bed, feeling overwhelmed, um, going to class, but kind of going through the motions, coming back home, getting in bed, wanting it and needing it to be basically dark all the time in my room. And it got to a point where I finally was just so overwhelmed. I remember going to our medical center at school, and I I was so upset and so overcome with emotion. I could hardly check myself in, and I remember them telling me that they were going to set up an opportunity for me to visit with the psychiatrist that they had on staff, which I had never done. And at the time, I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment about it. And I spoke with him. We had a session, and um, he offered the opportunity for me to take medication. And I remember asking him if I would, um, if I would have to make my parents aware that I would be on, some type of psychiatric medication at the time. And he said yes, because I was still under my parents' insurance and whatnot and all of that stuff. And I I rejected it because I didn't want my parents to think that I was crazy. And now that's been over 20 years ago. And I think times have changed a great deal in terms of how we view medical health, particularly in the Black community. There's been a stigma about addressing mental health and what we think about people who are navigating that. And when I say that it's an ongoing thing, I think when you deal with mental health, and depression and anxiety, it's not something that necessarily goes away, but it is something that you learn to manage, that you learn to address, that you learn to coach yourself through. And now I'm at the point where I have been able to take advantage of all the tools that I have, whether it's medication, um, being in a different place with God than I was when I was in college. Was I saved then? Yes. But the incredible thing about God is that He continues on this lifelong journey with you. Um, and it's like you're constantly getting to know Him on a deeper level and getting to understand His word and His promises and how that relates to you. And I remember a time when, this was years later, when I was going through another situation. And I remember I was pacing back and forth in my room. And I looked up at God and I said, I know you see me. I know you see me. And it's being able to talk to him from a vulnerable space and just say what's truly on the inside. That is what gets me over my humps that I go through. That is what remains consistent wherever I find myself in my journey. I mean, you don't know what life is going to throw at you. I had no idea that my dad would have a stroke, a year after I moved back to Dallas in 2015. No idea. And that changed, it changed everything. It changed our family dynamics. It changed the way my mom and I relate to each other. It put a new level of responsibility on me, um, that continues growing to this day. Um, but in spite of that, God is very faithful, and I'll leave it at that.
That is awesome. And again, I want to start off by saying thank you for your transparency and sharing that. Um, that's a beautiful testimony in the midst of the storm to share. And again, I don't think, just as with anything, there's a connection to all of this. You identified early on in your college years that you had mental health challenges, and God put it on your heart to address that. But now, just hearing your story, and I'm making the connection, you had to go through what you had to go through because you had to learn how to care for yourself, because God already knew 2015 rolled around, 2016 rolled around, you were going to be called to a responsibility that would require you to care for your dad. And that
Hmm.
was going to be overwhelming. And had you not been prepared in learning to love and care for self, that news would have just that news would have taken you out. It would have consumed you. You wouldn't have been able to process it. Now you can stand in not only in maturity but in faith, firmly
Yes.
in this moment, and be able to endure it. And having been in that caretaker role myself before, are there some days that it gets rough and challenging and you want to scream and pull your hair out? Yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, but it's like, but this is my loved one, and I want to do the best that I can to be there for them. That's part of the process when you have aging parents, is things like that occur, and you end up switching roles. You
Hmm.
become the mama or the
Yes.
daddy, and they become the child. And so the things that they did for you, you now are doing for them. So it is a blessing that you went through what you went through to be prepared for this moment, and trust and believe God will bless you for what you're doing, because everybody's not built to do that. There are many people who dismiss their parents, kind of put them to the side, because they don't want to deal with that type of responsibility. So I honor and respect you just for the willfulness on your part, intentionalness, your intentionality in wanting to love on your dad and be there, and of course be in support of your mom, as I'm sure she has her own challenges in trying to deal with that, and she's of a medical background. So all of those dynamics, seen and unseen, that go on. That's a powerful story that you have, and I'm glad that you have chosen to share that with us today. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump to you, Jeff, Mr. Running Man. Tell us, what has it been for you? I know you've had your series of challenges, ups and downs in life, but if there's any particular thing that sticks out to you that says this hit a little different for me, this was a bit much for me, but I was able to withstand it, and I'm either persevering through it, or it's an ongoing journey, as Michelle just related to. What would that story be like for you?
And immediately I think just one, but there was a pattern throughout my childhood that was a result of the divorce that I talked about earlier. In that, when my mom remarried and my stepdad became, uh, you know, a family element, his job, in order for him to advance, required him to uh, relocate to different cities and different states. And so, as a child, I was always starting new schools. We were always moving to a new house, a new city. I never had that foundation to plant roots and make friends. And through those phases, I became very socially awkward. I had a hard time making friends. I would open my mouth and the wrong thing would come out, and I would get teased or made fun of or bullied. But those, I mean, I can think of maybe a dozen schools that I started as a kid. We moved from Los Angeles to another city in California to Seattle, a couple houses in Seattle. But then in the summer between my seventh and eighth grade, we moved to Apple Valley, Minnesota, which was, I never imagined that my life would take me to Minnesota. And so my brother and I, we had to rely on each other a lot because we didn't really have uh, any outlet. And I mental health is something that's very important to me because this is it's kind of stems from a childhood of not having a lot of friends and always having to make new friends. And then when you enter a new environment, you're not given the opportunity to put your best foot forward. It is so true in life when they say you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And I just through the course of disappointments of starting new schools and carrying that memory of not doing it right the last school I was in, I went into this situation um, already thinking that my self-esteem was shattered, that I didn't really make friends easily, that I sat at home and played video games a lot. I never really got out of the house because I didn't want to interact with people because I didn't want to get bullied or teased or made fun of. But this particular move to Minnesota, it hit harder because it was that time of that growing up where we become teenagers and we become more critical of the really just stupid things in life. We start to judge people and tease people about things that they don't have any control over, about things that are part of their family economic status. I remember getting teased because of the clothes I wore, or that I didn't have enough clothes, like a more dynamic wardrobe. Like people would say, like, you always wear that same shirt, and I'm like, well, it's one of four shirts that I have, so things like that. It's I didn't have any control over it, and yet I was the recipient of all these negative attacks, if you will. Teenagers can be brutal, as you know, but this one hit differently because as I was trying so hard to gain the approval of other people, I found myself seeking that approval any way that I could. And as I, entered eighth grade and in ninth grade, I found myself hanging out with kids that were maybe not the best kids, but like the misfits in school. And so I got introduced to things like skipping school and smoking cigarettes behind the campus, and the things that you know back now I can laugh at, but it's not healthy behavior for anybody to be skipping school and everything like that. But that hit differently because for many years thereafter, I didn't have a healthy lifestyle because I was more concerned about fitting in to any category that would accept me. And this is the one that was, the one that finally, embraced me and said, like, you're one of us. And so, you know, the the journey from there to here is amazing, but that's kind of where it all started.
Wow, wow. And again, as I said with the others, thank you for sharing that transparency of what that was like growing up. It's always difficult, like you said, as a child growing up, especially as the older you get, that whole fitting in and what is the standard of being cool, and and what clothes are enough clothes. I mean, I went through that myself. I mean, my mom wasn't in position to buy me, all of the name brand stuff. I mean, I always went to school clean. I always had something to wear, but it may not have been, the latest fashion. It might be some off-brand name. So I remember those days getting teased about
True.
that from kids who, you know, their parents had, more financial means to buy that kind of stuff, and you feel some kind of way trying to fit in, and so that can definitely be challenging. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So
Of course.
with that said, with your various stories that each of you have shared, very unique in their own right, I'm curious to know, as it pertains to these stories that you shared, or just adversity in general, what does healing look like for you? So, in other words, when I'm going through challenges in life, dark times in life, what is sort of your regiment, your recipe? What do you tend to lean into during those moments to kind of help you again stay focused, stay locked in, not allowing it to consume you to that point? What works for you? What has been your go-to thing or things that you like to do? So I'll jump back to you, Denise, to tell us what it is for you.
Sure. I'll take the heart attack specifically, and for that, the very first thing that I had to do is forgive. And I shared with you all that I had a cardiologist who was just dismissive, and at one point was rude um, and mean about my symptoms. And when I had the heart attack, I shared again that I was traveling for work, and because of the magnitude of it, the cardiologist in Michigan, he didn't want me to travel. He said it's not safe for you to travel, not by car, plane, train, bus, none of those things. It's not safe for you. So and I say we because my mom joined me in Michigan. We stayed in Michigan for just under a month as I did some initial recuperating, and that in and of itself was traumatic. It was expensive, and coming home and just thinking about the magnitude of this could have been avoided. You as in the cardiologist, you could have done some things. You could have run more tests, and I had to get to a place where I forgave her. And for me, that meant writing this letter, uh, and being respectful, but just really giving the things that were concerning me and my frustrations, giving a voice to them. And I did. It didn't happen right away. It was literally on the 1 year anniversary. I sent a letter, letting her know, believe it or not, that not only did I forgive her, but I also thanked her. And that just goes back to, all things work together for my good.
Hmm.
And I realized that if if she had done something else, if she had done something else, I wouldn't have had the heart attack. If I hadn't had the heart attack, then any day CPR would not exist. If I hadn't had the heart attack, then Fresh Start for Your Heart would not exist. And so I thanked her. And even at that point, a year later, none of those things existed. But I knew that I was going to be walking in the purpose that God had for me. So I thanked her. I thanked her in advance of knowing anything that would happen. So I would say, for me, my healing journey was forgiving. So forgiving her, myself for anything. And then next, um, finding a support network. And that happened in the way of certainly my family, my mom, but also external. Because my mom, I could talk to her about most anything, but she never had a heart attack or any heart issues. So I had to find a community, and I think that's important for the healing. And I know that it worked for me because my very first meeting with Women Heart is a support group of other women who've experienced heart issues. My very first meeting, I cried like a baby as I told the story and said what had happened and how I was feeling. I cried like a baby for the entire meeting. And now I go to meetings. I talk about things about that how things have changed and how my life is today, and I don't cry. If you see me crying, there is certainly just happy tears and not tears of oh my gosh, what is happening. So I think it's so important in the healing journey. At least my healing journey was forgiveness and finding support. And for me, it's also, you know, God, I know that this is the purpose that you have for me, but what's next? What's next? And not rushing the process, because sometimes, and I admit this, sometimes I get to a place that, okay, yeah, I'm ready for the next thing now. And sometimes I just have to slow down. My mom tells me this all the times, and you just have to wait. You have to wait. And so just God, give me the strength to just wait and be of good courage. But for me, that's what my healing journey has consisted of.
All right, that's awesome. That's very powerful. I love the forgiveness piece. I love the community piece, and of course, obviously, the God piece. Because that forgiveness, I think we underestimate that. You could be holding a grudge about something that somebody did to you 10 years ago, and now you're in a moment where you're needing to be healed, and you're wondering why am I not healing? And part of that is because you have this unresolved stuff that's residing in you, and the best way we can describe it is like a poison.
Yeah,
Until you forgive, that's when you unlock that healing.
absolutely.
That's when your body, your mind, your emotions, everything is now free to receive the healing
Yeah,
that God has for you. But as long as you're walking around holding all that other stuff inside,
yeah,
you have this other situation totally unrelated, but it is in many ways related because you got this stuff that you
yep,
haven't gotten out of the way. How can I heal you if you're still locked in
yes.
on that? So that's beautiful that you shared that.
Thank you.
Um, Michelle, what does healing look like for you? What is your mode of dealing with things in life that come your way in terms of how to process it in a healthy and beneficial way that's worked for you?
Yeah, I think that healing is an ongoing process. Um, First, for me, it was about acknowledging that God was in my situation. God is in my situation. A lot of times, when we go through things, you're like, well, where is God in all of this? Like, is he even, like, is he seeing me? Is he going to be able to help me? And the thing is, yes, he sees you and he's working. And he might be so busy working that you may not be able to see him at the time. And that was definitely the case for me when I was in college. I declined to take medication and I declined at the time to see the psychiatrist again. So I truly had to lean into my faith. Um, I had to learn to, what I'll say, activate what God's word said over me. And I had to actually believe the promises that He's given me. A lot of times we'll read the promises, we'll hear the promises, but do we actually believe them? Like, do we make God's word our words? And so, even now, I find that that is what continues to carry me. So, in addition to my faith, I've had to learn to use my tools. Scripture says that faith without works is dead. So, yes, believe that God is in your situation, but you've got to work too. Otherwise, you're going to stay right there in the midst of that situation. So, you know, I learned that it is okay to ask for help. So for me, what that looks like now, I have a therapist, I have a psychiatrist, I use medication, I have a coach myself, and I also learned the importance of boundaries and, like you mentioned earlier, Joseph, taking care of myself. And that allows me to be in a better position to support the people around me, whether that's in my home, at work, at church, what have you. Like, I'm a better support when I'm at my best in supporting myself.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. Totally different perspective, but I love that. You know, love of self, boundaries. That's huge. And again, the works that God has set you up to do, you pour into others. And so, what better way to position yourself to pour into others effectively by making sure you stay filled?
Mhm.
And you know, you all are bringing up the therapy part of it. I had to come to grips with accepting, you know, the value in therapy. And it's a new journey for me that started last year, and there would have been a time that I would have never thought to do it nor and dare to even admit it in front of people, but there's value in that, and so I'm glad I've overcome that myth and that stigma of what that means and how impactful it can be for you, and then of course the God element, because as we've been talking about all along, there's some challenges that just, you know, the closest of friends and family, they just are not going to be able to relate to you. And it's just going to require a divine intervention, and that's the God we serve, and sometimes, and that's okay. When you do feel like there's no one else, there actually is at least one, and it's Him, and that's where you can, as you stated, that you can lean into to get that strength, to get that encouragement, and just having that faith to understand it. He's going to help me work through this and work it out. That there's a reason for it all, but I'm not by myself. I'm not been abandoned. I'm not been left alone. I don't have to pick up weights that were never meant for me to personally lift. I can hand that off to someone whose arms won't get tired, you know, who won't get sleepy, doing it for me. So that's awesome, Michelle. Thank you for sharing that. And then Jeff, back to you. What does healing look like for you as you deal with adversities and challenges in life? What's been your go-to to kind of work through those moments in time?
Well, for just real quick though, talking about therapy, I think we can all agree that writing a book is like the ultimate form of therapy. When I wrote my book, Savage Resilience, like I worked through all sorts of childhood issues just by pouring my mind out on the paper and to, see things from a different perspective, so, and that's just that's an eye-opening experience. I recommend everybody even just make an attempt to write a book or write a story about your life. You're gonna discover some patterns and some things that you may not have noticed. But that kind of circles back to you know the biggest change in my life occurred when um, I really adopted health and fitness as the foundation of how I live my life on a day to day basis. I made a conscious choice that all the horrible things I was doing to myself and my body was I was it was my responsibility to change it. And in my book, one of the main um, you know concepts is this concept of owner's mentality, and how that we are um you know there's a saying that says life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. And if you look at two different people, and they're presented with a problem, you'll see that you know one person will take ownership of the situation and accept the responsibility of it, even if the circumstances aren't fair, and deal with it. And the other person is going to play the victim, and they're going to cry and moan about how life's not fair, how I'm late for work because this person cut me off in traffic or didn't run that red light when there was totally time to go, and like complaining about the state of the government, why this elevator isn't working in the building. There's always somebody else to blame for our situations. But the one thing that really changed in my life, that really made the biggest difference, was adopting owner's mentality. And everything in my life, getting through all that trauma of like being teased and bullied growing up, I didn't instead, continue to play the victim and say like, oh my goodness, everybody's unfair to me. Everybody wants to beat me up. Everybody, teases me and bullies me, I say, I'm gonna do things in my life that move me forward. And if anybody's gonna judge me, they're gonna judge me on my accomplishments and my, and the good that I do in the world around me, and not for my past and for, the way that I was treated before. And so when I adopted health and fitness as the foundation of my life, it was not easy. And every day you try to get pulled back into your comfort zone. Every day, instead of wanting to get up and go to the gym or get up and go for a run, you're always going to find something that's going to, thwart your progress. But in the spirit of running a marathon, by putting one foot in front of the other, day after day, step after step, you will cross that finish line. It may take a long time, but if you don't give up, that is how you're going to get there. And forgiveness, therapy, mental health. I mean, it's an all interconnected thing. When you forgive yourself, you're taking ownership of your situation. For me, running is a great therapy because in your mind, like when you run, unless you're listening to music, it's very meditative time where you get to reflect on all sorts of things in your life, in all sorts of you know dreams and directions and goals and hopes that you want to take. And and so and just kind of wrap this all back around, it's like owner's mentality. It's like it was the biggest change, the biggest thing that made a positive change in my life. And so that's my story.
That's awesome. Awesome. Owner's mentality. That's a word to take away from that owner's mentality. Some of us might refer to that as accountability. And that's what it is. But I love that. I love that phrasing, owner's mentality. Not playing the victim. Yeah, we all go through challenging stuff, and it doesn't always feel good. And it's okay as human beings to express those emotions of how we feel. Again, we just can't stay stuck there. At some point, we have to make moves. We have to take a stand and figure out where do I go from here with that circumstance, with that situation that I'm finding myself in. And then, like you said, when it comes to other people, one of the themes that I mentioned in my book, I talked about, we teach people how to treat us, and so it kind of also goes back to what Michelle said earlier about the boundaries and things of that nature. So it all interconnects. So wonderful, wonderful stories in that regard. So real quick, if you had an opportunity to talk to your younger versions of yourselves, or just anybody who might be listening that's gone through similar situations or are going through similar situations that you've shared with us today, just in a few words, what would it be that your message would be to them to be of encouragement, to inspire them, to let them know, hey, it's going to be okay, that you're going to get through this. Denise, what would you say to young Denise?
I would say to young Denise, prioritize self care, including rest. You don't always have to be doing something, but rest. The next thing I would say is to embrace self compassion. To your point, Joseph, you mentioned about, you can have feelings, you can express those emotions. Don't stay there, but give yourself permission to be okay with whatever emotion that I'm experiencing. Advocate for yourself and build a strong support network.
Awesome,
That's my
awesome.
advice for young Denise.
Love it, love it. Michelle, what would you tell little Michelle how to deal with the struggles and challenges of life? What would be your words of encouragement to her or anybody who might be like the younger Michelle that's gone through some of the things that you've shared today? What would be your words of encouragement?
I would say to center everything around God, like truly, because that is going to be your anchor. Like life, there's just so many ups and downs. It gets very wavy sometimes. There are lots of storms, and sometimes it will feel like you are all alone. But you have an anchor, and it's an anchor that is never going to go away. It's an anchor that has a plan for you, that has a hope and a future for you, and it's an anchor that you can count on. And it's what is going to allow you to not just survive situations, but to thrive after those situations as well.
Awesome. Awesome. And to you, Jeff, what would you say to young Jeff who felt socially awkward, who felt like it was a struggle to fit in? Um, those who might be listening that identify with what that experience is like. What would you have to say to them?
It is difficult because when we're children and we're in that very impressionable environment of school, and it's like learning how to live in a social construct for the first time, it's very difficult to um, you know to see the forest for the trees back then. But I would say to myself, don't listen to all those other people, because it later on in your life you're going to accomplish so much more than any of these other people who like don't care so much about what other people think, because their opinions are just not going to matter in the end. I don't really, interact with many people from my high school, and all the teasing, all the bullying and everything that happened back then, it doesn't affect my life today because they are not a part of that decision making process. So I would say never let somebody else's opinion of you form an opinion of yourself. Think in your own mind, what do I want in my life, and go for it. And if somebody's telling you, you can't do that because you can't, believe in yourself. Own your desire, own your passion. And even if somebody makes fun of you for it, don't own it. And it's a recurring theme, but it's so powerful, is that don't let anybody else steal your thunder.
Absolutely. I love that. I love it. Own it. There's another thing, catchphrase we can take with us: own it. Don't let people define who you are. Because the thing,
Exactly.
we've all been gifted in our own ways to do a work, and everybody's not going to understand. And the reality is everybody's not supposed to, because it was meant for you to put out there. And even in the midst of feeling isolated and feeling like maybe everybody's not on board with what you're trying to do, they'll figure it out in time, if it's for them to figure out. So, like you said, just keep on keeping on, doing what you were meant to do, and not allowing that noise out there to distract or disrupt where you're going with that. So, with that said, as we wrap up our show today, I want to take an opportunity to celebrate, to acknowledge what's going on in your respective lives. So, again, as I started off at the top of the show, mentioning you all are authors, please tell us, um, what your book is, where it can be found, what it's about, as well as any other projects or anything like that you have going on that you could share, that we can celebrate as a community with one another, like minded individuals trying to impact and change the world. So I'll start with you, Denise. Tell us what you got going on. How can people find
Of
out
course.
about you? All that good stuff.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
Uh, Again, the name of my book is I Don't Want to Die Like This: A Survivor's Guide to Thriving After a Heart Attack. It is available at where you get books, but certainly on Amazon, Amazon.com. And what do we have coming up? I mentioned Fresh Start for Your Heart. Fresh Start for Your Heart is a 501c3 nonprofit, and it is a direct result of my experience. And what we have coming up on July 13th, we have a fundraiser at Kendra Scott in Allen, Texas. And there are details on our website. And we are raising money for a new program that we're launching, which is our BP Tracker program. Our BP Tracker program, we are giving blood pressure monitors to individuals in underserved communities who don't have them, and it would be a great help to them. So that's what we've got going on.
Awesome. Awesome. And what is your website?
It's freshstartheart.org.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Freshstartheart.org.
Awesome. Awesome. Michelle, tell us about your book. What's the name of it? Where they can find it, as well as anything else you might have project wise or exciting news to share.
Absolutely. My book is Little Ruby Does It Big: Big Experiences, Big Feelings, and a Bigger God. And you can find it at littlerubydoesitbig.com. And it really traces a day that little Ruby goes through where everything seems to go wrong. It's just one thing after another. And her mom is able to remind her that, yes, you've had a bad day. Perhaps you've made some mistakes. Things have been beyond your control, but God.
Awesome. Awesome. That is wonderful. That is wonderful. And Jeff, what exciting things you got going on? Tell everybody about your book, where they can find it, and all the other good stuff you got going on.
Oh, right on. I echo everyone here and just say thank you so much, Joseph, for having us all on as a guest here. But I want to reinforce that you know, a success and achievement really comes down to three easy steps. You got to decide what you want, commit to making it happen, and then take action and succeed. And it sounds so simple, but it's a formula that works. And if you just follow those steps in its simplicity, you'll drown out the noise and accomplish some great things in your life. My book is called Savage Resilience: Conquer Adversity and Be Your Own Hero. It is available on my website, jeffsavageonline.com, and on Amazon. But I am going to be speaking at the Global Thought Leaders Conference in New York City next month on the subject of mental rights. My talk is entitled Running for Your Life: How Marathons and Goals Can Boost Mental Health. And I also have had the pleasure and the honor of hosting a talk show here in the Dallas acting community. It's called Take Two, where we take two actors and get two takes on the real life of the working performer. I sit down and I interview actors of all different genres and talk about what it's really like to pursue the craft of acting as a profession. We are on YouTube, on Binge Network, but also on my website, jeffsavageonline.com. You can watch every episode of season one there as well. But, you know, one of the blessings of writing Savage Resilience is has put me on stage in front of people to put that message out to the world. And that's what I look forward to doing more in the future, is just, letting people know that, we all have the power to move our lives forward in huge ways if we just believe that we can and put one foot in front of the other as we keep going. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, awesome, and thank you all for being on the show. And again, we have a lot to celebrate. Yeah, great works in store, both in the present and coming down the pike. I'm excited to hear about that. Of course, if anybody's interested in finding out more about myself, you can go to josephbroberts.com to find out about not only to purchase my book, if you're interested in that, Blessings in the Streets, When God Leverages Our Valley Experiences, as well as find out about services and otherwise that I can be of service to you in that light. So with that said, again, thank you all for being on the show today. It has been a privilege, a pleasure, and an honor. I've had a lot of fun this morning with each and every one of you, sharing some awesome stories, some awesome journeys, and I'm encouraged by that. So look forward to getting a chance to hang out with you in the future in your respective projects and interactions. And as I've been saying to others that I've had on the show, we're going to do a better job at staying in touch with one another and encouraging and keeping each other lifted up and understanding that we're in this thing together. We're in a community. We're of like minds, and there should be no reason why we aren't staying connected accordingly and being supportive in whatever ways that we can possibly be in that regard. So with that said, this is the Blessings in the Street podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please like, share, subscribe, comment. Truly do appreciate that. And just remember, here at the Blessings in the Street podcast, this is the place where your story is your glory, relationships are relevant, and there's journey in your joy. So with that said, again, I'm your host, Joseph B. Roberts, signing off. And until next time, be well, be blessed, and I'll see you then.